This is the second video about so-called prophylaxis. In the first video, I showed some example about prophylactic moves. How can you think about your opponent's threats and plans, ideas, and how you should always stay focused on their ideas. I made a distinguishment between primitive prophylactics and subtle prophylactics. I will give now two beginner examples to explain what do I mean. So for example, everyone knows four moves checkmate. Um, though maybe not everyone thinks about this as a prophylaxis example, but it is. So you identify your opponent's threat, checkmate, and you have several ways to defend against this. And moves like queen e7 or queen f6 will be kind of primitive prophylactic moves when you just protect the square which your opponent is attacking. G6 maybe is a little bit better because you do two things. You protect and attack white queen at the same time, so you kind of win a tempo. White goes away, and the same thing, you can just protect the square with a queen, which would be fine, but you can play knight f6, which will block the attack and improve your position at the same time because you develop a piece. Second example will be even simpler, but at the same time also kind of beginner example. Your opponent plays knight g5, attacking f7, and complete beginner will sometimes probably play just rook f8, protecting this square. And needless to say, castles is much more useful move, and this way you defend against your opponent's threat in the best way possible. So I outlined several rules which will help you to perfect your prophylactic skills. I'm going to bring those rules as a Word file on the screen so you can see them now. So first of all, identify the opponent's threats, plans, or ideas. Second, ask yourself a question, is it dangerous? This is an important question because sometimes your opponent will try to do something which shouldn't bother you at all. Then you can ignore it. I mean, he maybe thinks that's a threat, but you see that this is not a threat because, for example, the threat he wants to make is blundering something. However, if the answer is yes, ask yourself, how can I stop it? But don't settle for the first move you see. Try to find a move which stops the threat and improves your position at the same time. Sometimes such move exists, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you will have to settle for the move which looks ugly, but maybe this is the only move which will stop the opponent's threat. All right, maybe one more clarification before I go to the examples. For example, very often the question is, how do I know when do I ask this question and when not? The first hint is you probably want to ask this question more often when there is a lot of contact between pieces. In the opening and original stage, most of the time, you don't have to ask this question. I'll give you an example. Like, for example, so you should try to concentrate on development and center and those things, because usually the threats which you might think are threats are not real threats. The development is much more important than pseudo threats. Like, for example, if he's threatening checkmate, you win a pawn or win a piece, obviously that's a threat. Everything else is not. So let's say your opponent will play something like this. At this point, there is no need to ask this question. Now, I hope you will see his threat right away. He's threatening to take your pawn, so you will protect it in some way. Maybe move like this, and he goes here, and let's say you just go somewhere. So you just develop. He plays, let's say, something like this. You will go here, and now let's say he plays move like this. Okay, once again, if you know this position, nothing to ask. But if you see this position for the first time, this move looks kind of strange. So you have to maybe think a little bit and ask yourself, what is the idea behind this move. And those of you who know this kind of pattern, they will know the idea is to play knight c5, and so the reason he plays a5 because he would like to play knight c5 without being bothered by the move b4. So when he does play a5 and you take a little bit of time and realize that his threat is not threat but more like idea is to play knight c5, how can I prepare for that? And the answer is very simple. You play a3 and you're gonna meet knight c5 with b4. So this is kind of primitive example as well, but as the game progresses there are more and more ideas and threats of your opponent, and then you have to react accordingly. All right, so now let's close this board, and I will start bringing positions on the screen. Black to move in this position. So the examples I'm going to show to you will be quite difficult examples, master level, or some of them may be even higher, some may be not so complex, but for sure you will learn from those examples almost regardless of your level. Here it's black to move, and it's not easy to identify the opponent's threats. So take a moment and think, ask yourself a question. If I pass, if it would be my opponent's move, what can he do? And the answer is that white is actually threading a breakthrough on the queen side, which is very easy to miss. For example, if you play natural move like g5, white will play b5, and you already are in trouble. For example, if you start moving your king, it will be too late. White plays a5, threatening a6. You have to check. Then he plays b6, threatening to check. You have to check, and after d6. Oh, sorry. Here, actually, you're all right. I guess the problem is with king g4. But in any case, yes. So this is basically a threat, and if you don't stop this threat, you're going to lose, because if we will continue this line, we'll see that black is zugzwang. He will have to give up the pawn, and he's going to lose. So the answer is, in order to stop this idea, you have to play b5 first. Let's go back. So in order to stop b5 idea, you have to play b5 first, hx b5, b6. Now all play on the queen side is stopped, and on the king side black is winning, because white will find himself in zugzwang. Like, for a moment, if white moves his king, black king will penetrate on g4, and then depending on what white does, on h3 or on f4. And if white plays h3, black plays g5, white king has to move again, and after g4, once again, black is winning. This is a relatively complex example, because you have not only identified threat, you see what is going to happen after that. But at the same time, we learned about the pawn break in those types of positions. All right, let's close this board. And the next one will be, once again, black to move. This is even more complex example. Once again, the question is, if I pass, what is my opponent going to do? So let's say you play some kind of neutral move which doesn't do too much, something like bishop f4, right? So white will play knight c5. By the way, in the original position, black is up a pawn. But white will play knight c5, attacking this pawn. You play a5, he plays knight b7, you play a4, he plays knight a5, and he wins another pawn. Equal material and probably equal position. So as black, you have to start thinking, how can I stop this threat? How can I stop knight c5? And once again, primitive prophylactics, which I'm sure is everybody's first reaction, bishop e3, is not going to work. Take a few seconds and try to figure out why bishop e3 doesn't work. And the answer is After white plays king e2, we find out that the bishop is overloaded. We have to guard c5 square, but at the same time, if we move bishop away, we give up d2 square, and he's gonna attack our c4 pawn. So therefore, the answer is actually one of the prophylactic moves, which we'll see more today and which you did see in the past. In anticipation of the opponent's threat, you move away the piece or threat which opponent is going to attack. So the answer is this move a5, because the point is that if white is going to play knight c5, now you can play bishop a3, and for example, move like knight b7 doesn't work because of bishop b6, and black knight is actually trapped. Sorry, white knight is trapped after king d7, king c6. So most likely you already are threatening f5, and so black is doing absolutely fine here. Another line is, let's say white plays king e2, stopping you from bishop e3. King e6, this move would be impossible with a pawn on a6 because it will be a fork. But now this move doesn't work because king d5, knight b7, a4, and unlike in the variation we looked before, c5 square is occupied by the king. Black is up a pawn and on the way to win the game. Let's close this board and look at the next example. Okay, next example, for those of you who saw the first video, should be a little bit easier. Material is even, black to move once again, and for a moment it looks like almost like a silly question. Why do I have to worry about white? Because it looks like black is doing great, and black is doing great. So black has an only open file. White rook on b5 is kind of in a tricky situation. White has isolated pawn. The square in front of the pawn is blockaded, so black is doing great. However, white does have a plan. So first of all, spend some time trying to figure out what white's plan could be. This is maybe the most difficult question in those situations. And the answer is that thanks to this knight on d5, very strong knight on d5, his rook on b5 is not doing anything. So his goal is to trade this knight on d5. And if we do nothing, he's going to play knight g4 followed by knight e3, and our advantage would either disappear or will become very small. So black's goal is to stop this maneuver, knight g4 to e3. And the simplest solution here, primitive prophylactics will be enough, will be the move h5. After this, we'll stop this knight from coming to g4. Next move, we probably will force it away with f6, and then rook can come on c4 or c2, and we will continue improving our position. But this will be the time when we need to first stop him from doing what he wants and then go ahead with improvement. Okay, we'll go to the next one. Okay, so here, once again, black to move. And white's threat is not hard to see. He wants to play knight d5. He wants to play knight d5 followed by knight f6 check. And there are two ways for us to stop the threat. One move is very obvious, and usually this is kind of a first knee-jerk reaction, to play simply bishop to e6. Unfortunately, this will not be enough, because if we play bishop e6, he plays knight a4, and even if we give this check, he plays king g1. This remains to be a threat. Black is in trouble. The answer is bishop to e4. We temporarily sacrifice a piece. It's even hard to call it sacrifice. We just stop knight d5, and after knight takes e4, queen f4 check, rook takes e4, black is doing fine. All right, let's close this board, and next position will be from the same game, just couple moves later. Here is white to move. Difficult example because black has not one but two threats, and that's very easy to miss. This is also kind of a theme which I'm sure you will find in some of your games. You defend against one threat only to find out that your opponent had something else. So this is another one of those situations. The first threat is obvious. You like to play queen e3 check and then check on c5. So you might once again to turn to primitive prophylactics and play queen d3 in order to stop this threat. However, he has another strong move in this position, which would be queen to e5. This is a good move in many queen and rook endgames or just queen endgames because centralization of the queen is crucial in those endgames. And here, with attack on this pawn and the idea to play rook e2 on the next move makes white's position dubious, to say the least. So which move will deal with both those threats at the same time? And the answer is the same centralizing move, queen d5. After playing queen d5, white stops queen e5, and queen e3 check is not dangerous because pawn on c5 is protected. And of course, the beauty of queen d5 is that we not only defend against opponent threats, we clearly improve our position, which could be seen easily from the move, from the line rook e2, rook f1. The queen in the center protects important squares and at the same time puts pressure on the opponent's pawns. So very good example of the value of the center, the value of centralizing your queen in the end game. And finally, white to move. White is up in exchange. However, number one, black has a pawn for the exchange, and white's pawn structure on the queen side is quite damaged. So black probably would like to play moves like queen c5 followed by knight c4. For example, if white will pass, let's say white will play some kind of, again, primitive move, something like rook d1, right? So black will play queen c5, threatening to take this pawn, and only way to protect this pawn is king b2, and after knight c4, black will win the game. So, and I'm sure this will happen in many of your games, because unfortunately, most of the time, when we look at the position, we just ask a question, what can we do? Looks like this rook needs to be brought to the game. Why not to triple on this file? And then, because we didn't ask the question, what is the opponent's next move, we're going to get in trouble. However, here you can solve both problems at the same time. You do need to bring the rook on h1 in the game, but at the same time, you can stop the opponent's threat by playing rook to h4. So very elegant move. Rook controls a lot of squares on this fourth rank. After queen c5, king b2, we have no problems. Moreover, maybe instead of king b2, we can even play rook b4, even stronger. And rook comes into game just like that. The method we see here is called rook sleeve, and it works pretty much perfectly. So this concludes our second video on prophylaxis. I hope it will help you to ask the question about the opponent's threats, identify them, and find the best way to deal with that. It's definitely one of the most useful tools you can use as a chess player, and just by purely asking this question, you improve your chess dramatically if you start doing this systematically. Maybe it will sound like a joke, but you don't really need to read many chess books to implement this method in your own games. Just pure determination, pure focus on the opponent's moves will make you much stronger player. Thank you very much for watching this video.